I hadn't planned on staying the night. I'd only meant to drop by, maybe have dinner, catch up with James. We hadn't seen each other since graduation, and after a year apart, me at university out of state, him staying behind to work, we figured a low-key evening was overdue. He texted me that morning, said his mom was making something insanely good and I should come hungry. I did. The house looked exactly the same. Red brick, trimmed hedges, the porch light that flickered sometimes. Familiar in a way that felt like stepping into an old memory. And when the door opened, there she was, Mrs. Carter, James's mom. She looked the same mostly, maybe a little softer around the eyes, maybe a bit more poised in her movements. She smiled warmly, pulled me into a quick hug, and said, "Still tall, still quiet. Some things don't change." We laughed, and she led me inside. The place smelled like garlic bread and something rich, mushroom cream sauce, maybe. The kind of smell that made you feel at home whether you belonged there or not. James was in the kitchen, grating Parmesan over a huge dish of pasta. We talked. He told stories that only mattered to the three of us. It was easy, comfortable, but around 9 p.m., his phone buzzed. He cursed under his breath. "Sorry," he said. "Work emergency." Jim's short-staffed, and someone broke a locker. Mrs. Carter raised an eyebrow. "And you're the one they call?" He shrugged. "Manager perks." Then to me, "You don't have to leave. Seriously, stay. Guest rooms made up." I hesitated, but she chimed in before I could answer. "It's no trouble," she said, "and I'd feel better knowing you're not driving back this late." So I stayed. James threw on his uniform and left in a rush. I helped clear the table. Mrs. Carter poured 2 glasses of wine, just a little, and we sat in the quiet kitchen, soft jazz humming from a speaker somewhere behind us. The conversation shifted. She asked about college, my major, whether I was still into photography. I asked about her work. She was still teaching part-time, doing some kind of wellness blog on the side. It was pleasant, but something was different. Her eyes didn't glance off as quickly when I spoke. She leaned in, chin in palm, watching me with this soft, focused gaze. Her laugh was still the same, light and melodic, but it landed differently now. Or maybe I was just noticing for the first time. Then came the silence. Not awkward, just heavy. She stood to rinse her glass. I stood too, out of habit, but she waved me off with a small smile. "You can head up whenever," she said. "Guest rooms across from mine. Fresh towels are already there." I nodded, muttered a thank you, suddenly more aware of how warm the kitchen had become. As I turned toward the hallway, she added, casually, over her shoulder, "Don't lock the door tonight." I stopped, turned halfway, unsure if I'd heard her right. She didn't look back, just dried her hands. The tap was still running. Her voice was calm, steady, like she'd just said something about the weather. I nodded, even though she wasn't looking, and walked upstairs with that sentence echoing in my head. Don't lock the door tonight. My room was neat, crisp sheets, low lamp by the window, a folded blanket on the chair. But I didn't feel tired. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor, my mind spinning in quiet circles. What had she meant? Was it just about laundry or something she might need? Or was it something else? I undressed slowly, pulled on the t-shirt I always slept in, left the door slightly ajar. Not wide open, not closed, and definitely not locked. Just enough. Enough for her to push it open if she wanted to. The house was quiet, not the kind of silence you forget. This one had a presence to it. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between the soft creaks of the walls. Somewhere downstairs, The dishwasher finished its cycle with a muted click. Outside, wind rustled through the trees, but inside everything felt still. Too still. I couldn't stop replaying her voice in my head. "Don't lock the door tonight." It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, soft, effortless, like they didn't carry a second meaning. But they did. Or maybe I just wanted them to. Maybe that was the problem. The hallway was dark. I could see the faintest sliver of light beneath her door, and I wondered what she was doing. Reading? Brushing her hair? Lying awake too? I turned over, pulled the blanket up, then kicked it off again. My skin was warm, not from heat, from something else entirely. I closed my eyes. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Not with that sentence still hanging in the room with me like invisible smoke. I must have drifted off at some point, because when I opened my eyes again, the light under her door was gone. The house had fully settled. No more distant creaks. No pipes. No breeze. Just darkness. And wait, I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. 3:12 a.m. I sat up, rubbed my face, swung my legs off the bed. The door was still ajar, just how I left it. Nothing had changed. And yet, everything had. I leaned back into the pillows, still dressed, still wired. Some part of me kept expecting the floorboards to creak again, to hear soft steps in the hallway, a shift of fabric, a pause. But nothing came. The next morning, the sunlight through the blinds was gentle and golden. I sat up slowly, half expecting it all to feel like a dream. But the door was still open, just enough to remind me that I hadn't imagined it. Downstairs, she was already in the kitchen. Same robe, hair pinned up, coffee in hand. A calmness to her that felt almost deliberate. She looked up when I walked in. "Morning," she said, voice light, smile easy. "Morning," I replied. I poured myself some coffee, sat at the table across from her. The silence wasn't awkward, but it wasn't the same either. There was something there, something neither of us mentioned. She didn't ask how I slept. I didn't bring up the door. Instead, we talked about nothing. Light things, weather, my drive back, a podcast she'd started listening to. She laughed at something I said and brushed her hair behind her ear in a way that made me pause. It was in the small things, the extra moment her eyes lingered, the way she touched my hand briefly when passing the sugar, the silence between words. And then she said it. "You left your door open." I looked up, my chest tightening just slightly. She didn't elaborate, didn't smile, just looked at me over the rim of her mug. I swallowed. "Yeah." She nodded once. "That's good." And nothing more. The rest of the day passed in a haze. James texted me around noon, said he'd be home by late evening. I offered to help around the house, and Mrs. Carter didn't protest. We moved around the living room, dusting, reorganizing a bookshelf she said she'd been putting off. I held the ladder while she reached for a box in the hall closet. Her leg brushed my shoulder. She didn't apologize. Later, she stood behind me while I looked through an old photo album. I felt her presence, close, quiet, a stillness that wrapped around me like static. When I turned to hand her the book, our hands touched, just for a second, but long enough for both of us to feel it, long enough for neither of us to move. Her eyes met mine, dark, calm, knowing. Then she smiled softly and took the album. That evening we had leftovers and a glass of wine. James still hadn't returned. The sun dipped low, casting amber light across the floor. I helped load the dishwasher. She dried the glasses. Everything felt normal, except none of it was. After the dishes, she said she was going to shower. I nodded. She disappeared down the hall, and the sound of running water filled the house. I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. 10 minutes passed. 15. 20. Then I heard her steps again. Barefoot. Soft. She walked through the hallway in a long, loose t-shirt. Her hair was damp, skin still slightly flushed from the heat of the water. She didn't say anything, just glanced at me, her eyes pausing a moment longer than needed, and then she turned the corner toward the stairs. I stayed frozen, waiting, and sure enough, a few minutes later, as I climbed the steps back to the guest room, I passed her door. It was open, just slightly, light off, but not fully closed. And once again, the choice was mine. I didn't go in. Not that night. I passed her door, paused, stood in the hallway for a second too long. But in the end, I kept walking. My heart was loud in my ears, my breath shallow. But I made it back to my room, closed the door just enough to feel some sense of control, and lay awake until the sun began to rise behind the blinds. What was happening? I'd known Mrs. Carter most of my life. She was James's mom. She made cookies when we had movie nights in high school. She asked about my exams. She gave me rides home when my parents were late. She wasn't supposed to look at me like that, and yet she did. The next morning, the mood shifted again. She was in the kitchen, already dressed, reading something on her laptop. The radio played quietly, a soft hum beneath the tension I carried with me. She looked up, greeted me like always, but her eyes flicked toward me for half a second longer. That was all. I sat across from her with my coffee, trying to decide whether to pretend nothing had happened or say something that might cross a line I couldn't uncross. And I think she knew, because after a long pause, she closed her laptop, looked at me directly, and said, "I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable." I swallowed. "You're not. Good." She smiled, then added, "Because I've never seen you uncomfortable before, not even as a kid. You were always in control of yourself." I didn't know what to say to that. My fingers wrapped tighter around the mug. She leaned back in her chair, folded one leg over the other. "You've grown up," she said simply. "That's all." I nodded. "So have you." She smiled again. "You mean I've gotten older?" "No," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I mean, I see you differently now, and I think you know that." Silence. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. If anything, her expression softened. Then she stood. "Come with me," she said quietly. No explanation, no warning, just those 3 words. I followed her. My pulse was pounding. She led me upstairs, not fast, not slow. Her bare feet made no sound on the wood. She didn't glance back, just walked ahead with the calm certainty of someone who'd already made a decision. She stopped at her bedroom door, opened it fully, turned to face me. The room was bright, curtains drawn open, afternoon light flooding in. It smelled faintly of jasmine and clean laundry. She stood just inside the doorway, hands still on the knob. I stepped forward, but didn't cross the threshold. We stood there, less than a foot apart, and she said, "I thought you might come last night." I inhaled sharply. "I almost did." She nodded. Silence again. Then she asked, "Why didn't you?" I thought about it, searched for the right words. Because I didn't know if I was imagining it, if I made it all up in my head. Her eyes searched mine. "You didn't. Then why?" "I wanted you to choose, not out of confusion or curiosity, but because you felt it too." I couldn't answer, because I had felt it. Every glance, every pause, every word she'd left unfinished, and the quiet power behind everything she hadn't said. Still, something inside me hesitated. This was James's mom. This was a line, a big one. And yet, here we were, standing at the edge of it. "You know this can't be a joke," I said quietly. I'm not laughing, she replied. She stepped back into the room, sat on the edge of her bed, not seductively, just calmly, like she belonged there, like she was inviting honesty, not performance. Her hands folded in her lap. You don't have to come in, she said. We can pretend none of this happened. Or we can talk. I took one more breath. Then I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, but didn't lock it. We sat in silence for a while, just looking at each other. No tension now, just wait, shared wait. She finally broke the silence. I've been alone for a long time, she said. Not just without someone around. I mean, alone. And sometimes, someone comes along and reminds you what it feels like to be seen. I swallowed. I felt invisible for a long time too. We didn't touch. We didn't move. Just sat there, her voice barely above a whisper. You're not invisible here, she said. My hand rested on the bedspread. So did hers. Close but not touching. And then her pinky brushed mine. Nothing more. But it felt like the loudest moment of the day. I don't know how long we sat there. Hands not quite touching, breath steady, thoughts louder than words. Could have been minutes. Could have been hours. All I remember is how still everything felt. How still she was. The sunlight moved slowly across the carpet as the day passed. No one knocked. No one interrupted. It was like the world outside her room didn't exist. At some point, I spoke. James will be home soon. She nodded. I know. Another pause. You're not worried? I asked. Her eyes met mine, calm. Should I be? I shook my head, though I wasn't sure what I meant. There were too many lines, too many consequences, and yet, none of that seemed to matter in that moment. She smiled gently. I've never done something like this. Me neither. Well, she exhaled. At least we're honest. We sat again in that shared silence, and it wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy, loaded with everything we weren't saying, and everything we had already said without needing to. She stood slowly, walked to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to glance outside. The driveway was still empty. James will probably text before he gets here, she said. He usually does. I stood too, unsure if I should move closer or keep my distance. She answered that question for me. Turning around, stepping forward, placing her hand softly on my chest. You're not a kid anymore, she said, echoing a line I'd heard her say to me once before. And I'm not just your friend's mom. I didn't say anything, didn't have to, because we both knew the truth of it. And yet we also knew the rules, the walls, the delicate balance of what this was and wasn't. She leaned in slowly. Not enough to kiss, not enough to cross anything final, but just close enough that I could feel her breath on my cheek. Her voice was almost a whisper. I think you should go back to your room now. I blinked. Now? She nodded. Before either of us forget how hard this will be to undo. I felt my chest tighten, not with disappointment, but with a strange kind of respect. Gratitude. She didn't need to explain. I understood. We'd opened a door that couldn't be fully closed again, but we didn't need to walk all the way through it. Not tonight. I stepped back. She didn't stop me, but just as I reached the doorway, she said, I meant what I said, about not locking your door. I turned, surprised. Her eyes were calm, steady. I just wanted you to know. If you ever do open it, I'll never pretend I didn't notice. I nodded slowly, then walked back to the guest room. And this time I didn't sit on the bed. I didn't lie awake staring at the ceiling. I just stood there in the middle of the room, breathing, processing. The door remained slightly open, but she never came, and I didn't go to hers. James got home around 8 p.m. We greeted each other in the kitchen like nothing had happened. He asked if I wanted to crash another night, maybe hang out again tomorrow. I told him I probably should head back early in the morning. Mrs. Carter played along like nothing was different, but I caught her glance as I packed my things. There was something quiet in her expression, a softness, a flicker of something we both recognized, but neither spoke aloud. As I left the house the next day, she walked me to the door. James was still upstairs. "You'll come back soon?" she asked. "If I'm invited." She smiled. "You are." I stood there for a moment longer, feeling the weight of the last 48 hours settle somewhere behind my ribs. Then she leaned in, not for a kiss, but to whisper something only I could hear. "Next time, don't wait for an invitation." And just like that, the door closed softly behind me. But part of it, whatever it was, remained slightly ajar.